The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 9th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus and the disciples went on and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying, and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all, and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Today's Gospel reading is almost a mirror to last week's. Last week, Jesus predicted his death. Peter argued that it wasn't true. And Jesus told them to pick up their crosses if they really want to follow him. This week, Jesus, again, predicts his death. The disciples argue about who is the greatest among them. And Jesus tells them to go to the bottom if they really want to be great. They're almost mirrors, and the thing that ties them together is Jesus' prediction of betrayal, death, and resurrection. Here's the thing. Jesus is not so much predicting his future as he's setting the remainder of his course on earth. And that scared the disciples. Verse 32 says that the disciples were afraid to ask Jesus what he meant. Not so much because they didn't understand what he was saying, but because what Jesus was saying wasn't lining up with their preferred vision of the future. There are two versions of the future playing out. One version is what the disciples think is going to happen to Jesus. The other version is what Jesus knows will happen. It's the difference between the path of glory and the path of the cross. The disciples probably saw glory in Jesus' future. Conflict with the Romans, ending the occupation, national victory for the Judeans, and naturally arguing who gets bragging rights as the greatest. That's the path of glory. But the path Jesus is taking is toward the cross. And on the surface, we have to remember the cross for what it is. Torture, suffering, defeat, failure. What the disciples don't realize is that it's in the failure and the loss that God is actually working. So, to set their minds right, Jesus tells the disciples that if they really want to be the greatest, then they have to be servants. Servanthood is taking on the role of a servant and volunteering to help those in need. And still to this day, as disciples, we value community service. Servanthood looks like many things. It looks like helping at a food bank. It looks like giving out school supplies to those that are disadvantaged, mucking out someone's flooded home. All forms of servanthood. But servanthood can also be more subtle. Servanthood can also be voluntarily surrendering your freedoms, laying down your rights in order to help someone that is vulnerable feel safe. That's also servanthood. In his recent book, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks argues that the great crisis of the modern world is that we are so individualistic that we've lost sight of the fact that we can only live in a community. We're so focused on the I that there is diminished sense of we. Society has become a collection of individuals who ferociously defend their rights, yet have little sense that with rights come responsibilities. This, says Sachs, is a recipe for social chaos. Now, you don't have to get very far down the comment thread to realize that social chaos is a present reality. Jesus could very easily be standing here among us today asking, what were you arguing about? What is it that you were so passionate about that you needed to prove that you were right and they were wrong? Despite our current reality, I have hope in the church, and it needs to be stated. I have hope because the church is the incarnational extension of Jesus' body on earth. I have hope because the church can be the space in which we lay down all of our other identities, exchanging them for the one identity that unites us: baptized child of God. The church is the place where we all come with open hands, hungry for spiritual food and drink. And we all receive the same bread, the same wine. No one gets more, no one gets less. The church, which includes both us and Bellaire here, and also the universal church, made up of all God's people, is a community like no other. Its values, in many ways, are backwards from the rest of the world, or at least they ought to be. If you want to rise to the top of this community, you have to go to the back of the line. Here, you show your aspirations and your leadership by going lower. To make his point, Jesus picks up a child. Children are vulnerable, they're powerless. Instead of clamoring for positions of privilege and status, instead of arguing who is right and who is wrong, you should be willing to yield your social status, yield what is owed to you, yield your freedom to those who are weak and vulnerable and viewed by others as lower. Today we welcome 10 kids to the table for the first time. It's an important milestone to eat and drink at this table for the first time. And it should add a little awe and wonder into all of our communing today. Try to see and hear and touch and taste it through their experience. We should also remember that we don't get to decide who's welcome at this table. Jesus does. This is not the communion table of Faith Lutheran Church. This is the table of Jesus Christ. He is host, not us. That means we have to welcome who Jesus welcomes. Jesus said, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." And so we welcome each of you to this table. This is a table, and it's not unlike the tables at your home. Your table at home is a place where you can eat a meal, but it's also a place where you can talk to your parents. It's a place where you can say thank you for what you receive. It's a place where you can lay down the stuff that you are carrying in from the world. It's a place where you can seek help with all the questions that are bugging you. This table is like the tables at your home, where you can do all those same things with God. This table is a place where you don't have to be afraid to ask Jesus. God is always welcoming you to this table. Jesus is here, always present in bread and in wine. The Spirit is nourishing and sustaining you every time you eat the food given here. Amen.